everyone, and welcome to this session of the Tourette Association's virtual conference. I am Natalie Joseph Pauline Blaine, Education Project Manager at the Tourette Association of America. Thank you so much for joining us today for navigating cultural challenges. We would like to take this opportunity to thank our conference platinum sponsors, Amelix and David Amundsen, our diamond sponsor Oracle, as well as all our donors and supporters for making this free conference possible. To help us continue to provide educational programming like this, please consider making a donation. Your gift will assist the Tourette Association of America in continuing to provide critical support and resources to the Tourette syndrome and tic disorder community. Please visit tourette.org/donate to make a contribution today. During today's session, we would be very happy to hear from you and include your voice in the conversation. You may ask questions or share comments using the question panel or the chat section on the right side of your GoToWebinar player at any time. We will collect your questions and address them during the question and answer session at the end of the presentation. So it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Michael Chichioco. Michael is a 22-year-old Filipino-American college student and is pursuing a major of biochemistry and minor of psychology at Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts. Michael was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome when he was 14 years old and has been trained as a Tourette Association Youth Ambassador in 2014 and was trained as a rising leader last year in 2019. Michael is passionate about spreading awareness regarding culture and Tourette syndrome and strives to encourage everyone to accept their differences and be proud of who they are. So without further ado, Michael, we look forward to your presentation.
Great, thanks, Natalie. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the TAA for allowing me to present to all of you guys. I'm really appreciative that everybody could come to this talk on navigating cultural challenges. I'm really excited to talk about this. I believe that it's a really important issue for anyone to know about, and to know about the intersection between culture and Tourette syndrome. I think we don't talk about it too much, and I'm really happy that everybody's here so we can start more conversations about this topic. So just to give you guys an agenda for what I'll be talking about today. So first, I'll be just going over an introduction, some facts about Tourette syndrome, statistics, as well as talking a little bit about intersectionality. I'll then be going into my story. I want to emphasize here that when you're thinking about culture and Tourette syndrome, there's unique experiences, and it's very diverse, right? From culture to culture, from person to person. And my story is not representative of everything. I can't cover all the bases. It's simply my story. And that's what I really want to emphasize about culture and Tourette syndrome. It's really emphasizing the individual, right? Just my story is just one, snapshot of that. But I hope that I can share some things that you guys didn't know about through sharing my story. I'll also be going over some key takeaways that I've learned to share with you all. And then lastly, connecting it to the big picture for what we can do as next steps for the whole broader Tourette community. So firstly, anyone can have Tourette syndrome. As you see on the slide, Tourette's syndrome affects all races, ethnicities, genders, ages, and it really is a lifelong condition. And what I want to emphasize here is, it's not just because we don't necessarily see every race and ethnicity represented, doesn't mean that none of them have Tourette's, right? I think for me, I have not met many people of color before with Tourette syndrome, and I was led to believe, oh, I'm the only person of color with Tourette syndrome. But I think this slide is really important for us to know that, hey, just because we don't see them or hear about them doesn't mean that they don't exist. And I think that's really important as to set the stage for the rest of the discussion on this topic. So what do the doctors say? Another key point is Tourette syndrome is a medical condition. I'm sure as many of you are familiar with the stigma around Tourette syndrome. Some of my tics in the past, included swearing, included um, hitting people, and just like a lot of twitching. And I think sometimes it's hard for people to understand that, we can't control it. And it really is a medical condition, just like anything else. We can go to the doctors for it. We can help get treated for it. And it really shouldn't be viewed in any other way other than just a legitimate medical condition. So I wanted to emphasize that. A few statistics here you can see on the screen. 1 out of every 160 children between the ages of 5 and 17 in the US has Tourette syndrome that's diagnosed. And the same thing here in the middle figure, 1 out of every 100 children has Tourette syndrome or another tic disorder. And I think these statistics mean something different to everyone. To me, the way I interpret it is I was pretty shocked at how common it was actually. It wasn't until I was maybe 15, 16 that I met someone with Tourette syndrome for the first time. So to me, I thought it was like 1 in 1,000 or, a lot more rare. And it is actually more common than we think. And going on that, an estimated 50% go undiagnosed. And I really want to challenge everyone here to think critically on why is that, right? There's so many reasons for why this could be happening. And, one thing that comes to mind is, socioeconomic. Some families and individuals just might not have the resources to seek medical treatment, and some may just not have as many physicians and clinicians around them to actually receive help. And I think, that goes hand in hand with sometimes there's lack of awareness amongst medical professionals with Tourette syndrome. And the next point I want to bring up is really culture, and that's the main crux of my whole talk, right? Culture. And I'm going to be talking about how, family views influence my own views and influence everyone's views about, do we want to seek out medical help? Is this even a medical condition? Is this even something you go to the doctor for? And that is really, those beliefs are really rooted culturally. So intersectionality. Basically, I know it's a big word, but in this world and in society, we have all these different categorizations, right? Social categorizations and identities, and they all intersect together. And I have this great quote here from Audre Lorde: "There is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives." And I think that's so important when we're thinking about the connection between Tourette syndrome and culture. I'm Filipino American, and the cultural background really impacts the way I viewed myself. I'm going to be talking about the beliefs around mental health and neurological disorders in the Philippines, and I think that impacted the way I viewed myself with Tourette syndrome. And I think what's important here is when you're thinking about various identities, gender identity, sexual identity, ability, ethnicity, you can't look at them, each individual one, in a vacuum. You really have to look at how they interact together, how they intersect together. And that's how you're going to see how my family thinks of neurological disorders impacted the way I view neurological disorders, especially in the beginning. And that really did have a profound impact on me. And I think another layer as well is, discrimination towards various identities, such as the color of my skin, culture, and of course, disability, Tourette syndrome. And I think this is also important, at school, socially, looking for jobs. I felt many times that it wasn't just one identity. I felt multiple times, I was very conscious of, I'm the only person of color here. I'm also the only person with a disability here, and it kind of layers on top of each other. And of course it intersects. And throughout my presentation, you'll see this common theme of how, I'm not just Asian, I'm not just Filipino American, I don't just have Tourette's, I'm not just a male. I'm all of those things together, and all of the good and the bad and everything in between make up who I am. And I think that's really important to understand. So a brief intro to myself. I'm at Northeastern University, majoring in biochemistry, minor in psych. I have an interest in the medical profession, and one day I hope to be in the field of psychiatry or neurology. I've been involved with the TAA for a long time. I'm really grateful for everything that they've done. They're a great platform for me to be able to speak and spread awareness. I've been a youth ambassador and a rising leader. And lastly, I'm Filipino American. And as you'll see, and if you have friends that are Filipino or any culture, culture is really important to us. And I think Filipinos are very resilient. We have a huge emphasis on family, and our life really revolves around that. And that really impacted my life values, my life decisions, and it also impacted my journey with Tourette syndrome and my family's journey with understanding and accepting Tourette syndrome. So let's dive into my story, and I want to talk a lot about my family background and Filipino culture. Here's my family on the right. So I think important to understand is, so my parents immigrated to the United States as adults from the Philippines around the college time. I have many other families, extended family members that did the same, and a lot of my family still lives currently in the Philippines. The reason I mention that is, I think of, so, there's a lot of terms of like first generation, second generation. But so if I'm first generation United States American, and my family came and my parents like gave up what they had in the Philippines. They had to come to a new place. They had to learn how to balance their old culture of the Philippines to their new culture in America. And that's really difficult. And there's a lot of sacrifices and adjustments that had to be made to allow for my sister and I to have this life here and to have this opportunity. And the reason I mention that is I think when understanding, culture, I think it's understanding how this impacts the dynamic and the relationship between me and other family members. I think sometimes there tends to be this comparison of, like struggle, where I'm like, my struggle with Tourette syndrome is not as bad as having to leave my home when I'm like 19 and leave everything that I have and come to America. And I think sometimes that impacted the way, whether or not I spoke up, whether or not I felt comfortable talking about my concerns with my family. And on top of that, in the Philippines, the views on mental health, neurological disorders, disabilities is very different. Philippines and Filipino culture, especially back when my parents were growing up, as compared to now. And I really want to emphasize here that these beliefs, while different, are not necessarily better or worse, right? And I don't want to appear as if we're putting blame or making these views seem as worse. They're really not. They're just different. I think what's important when we talk about culture is that it's all relative, right? In the Philippines, if mental health and neurological disorders just aren't seen quite as real. People don't really understand it. There's a stigma about it. And I think many times just the concept of it is very fuzzy, of course. And there's a lot of labeling about having disability, and people don't really think like neurology or psychiatry is real medicine. And I think that's important to understand because, of course, it was frustrating for me. But when I understand that they really mean no harm, that's just how they grew up, right? And how did that impact? What role does my family's culture play in my life? Growing up, all those beliefs, came down to me, right? They all transcended to me, and I believe the same thing, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? But it did, bring some barriers and some challenges when I was diagnosed and I started to have symptoms. So talking about my childhood and diagnosis. So I was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome at age 14, and I experienced tics around age 5. And at the time, around age 5, looking back at it, I did have many tics. I did have several tics, but I didn't have the words to explain it. And my parents and my family members, as I just mentioned, have never really been exposed to this. So you can imagine just the degree of confusion on both ends, right? And many times frustration as well. And I think around age or 11 or 12 is when my tics definitely started to get more severe, and we couldn't just quote unquote ignore them the way that we could when I was 5 or 6. And I think that's when I really started to feel a lot of barriers. That's when I started to wonder, like, hey, what's going on? My family started to wonder, hey, what's going on? We've never seen this before, and it's uncomfortable. And in our culture and in my background, like I mentioned, it was just new, right? So what role did my family's culture play in seeking out medical attention for Tourette syndrome? So I think a big thing was lack of awareness on both ends, on my end just as much as my family's end. I think we just really didn't know that this is something you could get medical attention for, help for. We didn't think it was necessary. In fact, me, I think I had a huge stigma against it. There was a lot of shame. I think, like I've mentioned, in the Philippines, we don't really talk about that stuff. It's kind of put, in the top shelf. It's not talked about. It's an elephant in the room. And I was like, even if this is real, right? I did Googling and I saw, I think this is what it might be. I was like, I don't want this. I don't want this to be part of my life. I don't want this to be part of my identity. So even when my parents wanted me to seek medical help for maybe a year or two, I didn't want it, right? There was a lot of shame there. I did overcome that, but it took a while, and I think that was rooted in just my culture and my background. And it was amazing to get the diagnosis, to have someone, tell me, a doctor, tell me word for word that this is not my fault, that this is not me misbehaving, this is not me making things up, and it's not my fault that I'm getting bullied at school or anything like that. And it was really relieving to get the diagnosis, but it didn't solve all issues immediately. I think just in general, like in our world, a label of a neurological disorder or disability can introduce many barriers. Specifically in culture in the Philippines, to say you have a disability, it can bring a lot of shame on the individual, on the family. I think for me, from my end, I felt a lot of guilt. I felt a lot of, did I do something wrong? Like I felt like I was a burden on my family, on my parents, on everyone around me. So that's a great segue into the family barriers and challenges. Here on the right is a picture of me and my dad in 2014 when I was trained as a youth ambassador. So some barriers and challenges. Like I've already discussed, a lack of awareness regarding Tourette syndrome, neurological disorders and disabilities across my whole family. Again, I think this was a big thing. We just didn't know these things could happen. We didn't know there were medical conditions like that out there. And of course, when my tics started to cause issues, when I started to talk to family members about it, it did result in some judgment and it did result in some arguments, right? And I think also another important point is, I think in Filipino culture, speaking up as a kid, I was 14, 15 at the time, speaking up to your elders and correcting them is not really accepted and is not necessarily normal, right? We're really taught, the kids, you don't speak until you're spoken to, sort of thing. And I think there was a big kind of moral dilemma there for me of certain people are saying things, in my family that are ignorant, or certain people are saying things that are hurtful. And when do I speak up and when do I not speak up? And I think that was a challenge I had to navigate of, when do I put my foot down as a 14-year-old, or when do I just take it? And how can I be patient and accept that I'm angry, but not let that get to me? And it was difficult. I can talk about it now, but it wasn't easy, right? It's not as black and white as, oh, you just deal with it. It is difficult, right? And it was difficult not just for me, but for my family. Put yourselves in their shoes, right? You grow up for 20 years of your life, and for even like my grandparents older, like 40, 50 years of your life, you're taught that that disabilities really aren't real. You're taught that that it's just made up. You're taught that if you're crying, you get over it, right? If you can't, if you're ticking, you just stop. You just control it. And if you can't, then you're faking it or misbehaving. And if someone just comes in, a kid comes in all of a sudden and has this, it's hard to just switch your life views, right? It's just hard to switch all of that, and that's not their fault. And of course, it's difficult for them, and it was difficult for me. It took me a really long time to get to this point of understanding that middle ground, understanding that, hey, like their views, just because their views are different from the views here in America where I grew up, doesn't mean that it's wrong, right? It's just different. And it took me a while to understand that. But I think once I was able to, it really helped me cope, really improved my relationship with my family. And it really, I think, made a lot of all of us happier. So building on that positivity, how did I navigate these challenges? So open and honest communication. I mean, it's the key. You know, I think there were many times where I just said, hey, like, I'm frustrated. Why did you say that? And sometimes my family would say, hey, you need to be more patient. And I think that's important. I think in our culture, it's we don't really talk about emotions a lot of the time. We don't really confront the elephant in the room. We don't confront what's bothering us, but it's really important to do so. And I saw, you know, over the years and even up to today, we're still having this open and honest communication. And that's like the number one most important thing. So education and resources from the TAA. This was excellent for me. It gave myself the words to be able to explain it, right? It gave me words and resources and confidence to explain it accurately and to speak up for myself. And it was a great resource for the rest of my family. I know a lot of my family looked up on it. They have great, you know, pamphlets and articles and everything that provides a lot of education about what Tourette syndrome is and how to navigate it. Creative ways to help understand my family, help my family understand TS. I'm sure some of you guys are familiar with the Pledge of Allegiance activity. It's just this cool activity where everyone writes out the Pledge of Allegiance in a minute. You know, it's like a test. And I give them, so to speak, ticks. So one of the ticks I have is actually when I'm like writing essays, I always have to delete the words and then like hit spacebar and enter, and it's pretty difficult. And then on top of all my other physical ticks. And what I told them is every 3 words you have to cross it out, and then every time I clap, you have to tap the top of your pen to the table. And you know, as I would kind of simulate it as when anxiety increases, you know, when you have less time, I would clap more to simulate more ticks. And I think what this did is it really was more powerful than anything I could have told them. It was more powerful than the words because they understood the feeling of, dang, this is difficult. It's hard to write on a test and have to tick and worry about all these things. And I think that helped a lot when I was able to do that with my family. And I learned that from the TAA. And lastly, patience, resilience, and strength for everyone, you know, not just me, but everyone in my family. It's not easy. You know, it's new, it's challenging, it's hard to navigate. But I think being patient, you know, for me, being patient with myself, being resilient and strong, you know, bouncing back. There are going to be arguments. There are going to be difficult times. There are going to be times where you really just do not understand. And that's when it's even more important to stay resilient, stay strong, and to bounce back from that. So feeling alone. This is something I wanted to emphasize because, you know, it was hard for me to find others with similar experiences. You know, for starters, just with Tourette syndrome, like I mentioned, I haven't, outside of the TAA organized events and camps, I really haven't met that many people with Tourette's. So there's already that one layer of I felt different from people. And then even at these organized events where I was meeting other people with Tourette's, it was amazing, right? I was like, this is the first time in my life that I found someone that and people that can understand me. And then I was like, well, now I'm the only person of color. I'm the only Asian or Filipino American here. And then I felt different, you know, from my peers. And again, this really built upon that shame and guilt. You know, I already felt, I think a big part of my experience, you know, arguably just as much or even greater than the tics themselves was the guilt and the shame that I felt. You know, I felt a lot of guilt that people were, you know, my family was arguing over, you know, whether I'm faking it or if it's real or if I'm just doing it for attention. You know, I felt a lot of guilt and shame about that. And it's something that I wanted to relate with other people because it really impacted, had a whole new dimension to my experience. And when I wasn't able to do that, it felt even more shame, right? I was like, am I really, like, am I the only one that has this? Of course, I know now I'm not the only person that was in my situation, but it felt like that. And I think that's why I'm so glad there's so many of you here today, because I want everyone to know that if you feel alone, you're most likely not. you know, and I think that's what I learned the most. And how did I cope? So public speaking, I love public speaking, and for many reasons, because I think the biggest reason is it allows me to help others. I think, you know, if you think back 5, 6, 7 years ago when I was not this confident, I was not able to speak about my story. Um, it was amazing when I could see people speak up about it, right? And I think for me, my biggest intrinsic motivator is I want to speak up for those who maybe can't right now, you know, and show them that they aren't alone. And just knowing that there are people out there that could be hearing my story and benefiting from it, it also makes me feel less alone to know that I'm able to impact even just one person positively. And I've done that through speaking with the TAA, and also hosting like awareness events, workshops, and like group discussions at school at my University Northeastern. And lastly, reminding myself that my emotions and feelings are valid. And not just myself, but everyone's feelings, right? My family's feelings, my friends' feelings, my own. You know, there are a lot of times where I felt guilty, I felt angry, I felt frustrated. And as soon as I told myself, that's okay, you know, that is okay, things improved a lot, right? It's fine. You know, I think sometimes it's like, you know, maybe I shouldn't feel frustrated. Maybe I shouldn't feel guilty. No, it's okay. And I think that's what helped me, you know, live life a little less preoccupied about, is this how I should be feeling? No, whatever you're feeling is valid and that's fine. So leading into that, what have I learned? You know, understanding and acceptance is an ongoing and continuous journey. And I apply that both to myself and my family. You know, it's taken years for my family to understand and accept me and my Tourette syndrome, my condition, my point of view. And it's taken myself a long time to understand their point of view, as well as understand my own, you know, my own condition, and to be proud of myself. And it's okay. It's gonna have ups and downs. You're gonna have peaks. You're gonna have valleys. And that's fine. There's gonna be times where you feel like you can't go up from it, and you will go up from it. And I've learned that you will have times where you will bounce back. You will have times where you feel like you can't, but then you do anyways, and you prove yourself wrong, and you say, wow, I can do this. So I think it's important to understand that it really is a continuous journey of self-growth. And like I was saying earlier about the validity of our emotions, being upset and frustrated is normal. You know, accepting all feelings as valid is important for self-growth. Of course, I learned, you know, not to be stuck there, right? I wanted to move beyond that. But it's okay to be frustrated or sad a little bit. And how you reflect and be introspective on how can I improve this? What do I need right now? That's where the growth happens. And if you just keep doing that all throughout life, you'll grow and grow and grow and grow. Lastly, patience and finding middle ground. You know, some people are going to take longer than others to understand it. And they're going to have that same up and down journey that you're going to have. And some may never be fully understanding, but I learned to find a middle ground. You know, there are some family members who are so rooted, you know, in their beliefs that it's kind of hard to really fully change their mindset, but we can find a middle ground. And I may not be able to 100% understand someone's frustrations or inability to understand it, but we can find a middle ground. And I think that's really important, and that, you know, we don't necessarily need to convert everyone. We just need to be able to accept and understand everyone's point of view. Lastly, I should be proud of who I am and what I've accomplished, no matter my differences, right? Everyone should be proud of themselves, be proud of the intersectionality of all their identities, and to embrace that. So lastly, what can we do as a community? So the two things that, you know, really come to mind is continuing to share stories from diverse backgrounds, as well as spreading awareness. And everyone's experience with Tourette syndrome is unique in many ways. You know, and for everyone, this can look differently. If you have Tourette syndrome, if you don't, if you feel like culture played in a role in your life or it didn't. I think what's important is we get the ball rolling of everyone sharing their story, right? I think when we put a lot of stories out there of diverse backgrounds, everyone sees, hey, there's someone like that. There's someone like me. I didn't know that there was someone like me out there, or someone that had this experience and felt impacted by that. And I think that's really powerful. That's what gets people to speak up. That's what gets people to feel not as isolated And I think as a community that can have, amazing ripple effects for years to come. Lastly, I think the bottom line is help others in any way you can. Helping families who are going through similar things, and just doing anything you can in your best intention to help people. It doesn't need to be that complicated. If it's just as simple as listening, sharing your story, that's fine. Anything you can do to help others, to me, is going to strengthen our community and just strengthen who we all are as people. So thank you for listening. I hope you guys were able to gain a lot of that. And I think now we're going to move on to questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael, for such an excellent presentation and for really taking the time out to share your story and talk about some of the cultural challenges that you face, but also importantly, talking about the importance of intersectionality and what you've learned in your different experiences. So thank you so much. To everyone, as Michael mentioned, we're now going to begin answering the questions submitted during the presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit your questions through the question panel in your control section. And for everyone, if we are unable to get to everyone's questions here at the Tourette Association, we have a full-time information and referral staff who can answer your questions as well by emailing support@tourette.org or calling 1-888-4TOURET. So Michael, I'm going to just take a second and look at some of the questions. So one of the first questions that I see is, given the cultural differences of acceptance and acknowledgement of mental health conditions within the Filipino culture, how can service providers communicate a diagnosis and also offer support to the family in order to move towards acceptance of the diagnosis? Do you have any practical tips that you can offer?
Great. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the first step is for any service like medical provider, clinician, is to just understand the family's point of view. Filipino American culture and Filipino culture, like I discussed, my family's culture is just one portion of that. There's similarities, but there's also differences family to family, and that's going to vary on many things. So for the provider, I think thinking, okay, put themselves in the family shoes. What is influencing, how they're viewing it? Do they accept it? Or are they not there yet? And then using that information, that's how you can really personalize the advice you can give. If they are very resistant to it emotionally, I think helping, having a heart-to-heart, maybe showing them some resources so they can learn a bit more, maybe showing them, providing them with articles, documentaries, and then maybe having a facilitated discussion with their child. I think the most important point I want to emphasize is it's really personal, to make it personalized to their unique situation, and know that there really isn't this magic bullet of one size fits all. There's some similarities and a common thread, but you do need to make it personal to each person's situation.
Great, thank you, Michael. Another question that we have is, what were some things that your parents did or said that helped you feel comfortable in your own skin dealing with Tourette's at school, in your community?
Yeah, so I think something that my mom would always tell me is, when I was feeling down about feeling different, is, if you're like everyone else, you can't stand out. You can't, if you're just like everyone else, you can't stand out. You can't be a leader. You can't, you're just gonna fit in, because I felt a lot of times that I couldn't fit in, and my mom helped me realize, that's fine, because you don't fit in, you see the world differently, and it allows you to make positive impacts, and it allows you to make changes that other people might not be able to see because of the experiences I had. And that's just one thing that my mom would always tell me, that's really empowering, because it got me to realize, I have this, I feel different, but I can use this as a strength, and I can use it to feel proud of what I'm doing and who I am.
That's wonderful. Gretchen asks, how do you cope with those outside of the family who absolutely refuse to acknowledge that your diagnosis is real?
Great question. And, it's difficult, right? But again, I think for me, I think empathy and putting yourself in their shoes is always a great starting point, right? Is, whether they have malintention or not, I think for me, having a strong sense of self and knowing I'm not going to let this impact me. And it took me years to get to this point where I can say, when they say this, I'm just gonna let this fly over my head. But understanding that their point of view, they do genuinely believe that they believe in that. And I think when you realize that just like your own beliefs are your own beliefs and their own beliefs are their own beliefs, it helps me feel a little less angry and frustrated, right? It helps me accept, some people just think like that. And I'm gonna try my best to bring them to a middle ground. I'm gonna try my best to explain to them and if they can't, they can't. And, I learned that, I had to pick my battles. I can't win every time. I can't explain it perfectly to someone every time. And being patient and being okay with yourself and being patient with others, I think is really, is what helped me.
Yeah, patience is really a great virtue. So Michael, in the presentation, you mentioned that sometimes you were the only person of color that had Tourette syndrome when you would meet others. Celine asks, have you found cultural challenges between your peers of different cultures and the challenges of having Tourette syndrome?
Sorry, can you just repeat the end part?
Sure. She asks, have you found cultural challenges between your peers of different cultures and the challenges of having Tourette?
Yeah. So I mean, I remember when I was at at an event and a training, I've talked to people from other cultural backgrounds, and there's definitely a lot of similarities. I think one of the most common threads is family, definitely. Um, the intersection of family, I think family in a lot of cultures is super emphasized in like gatherings and, all throughout your whole childhood, family is really involved. So I saw a lot of similarities with that with friends from other cultures. And I think another big one was what I was talking about, discrimination on many layers. You know, I remember I had a conversation with someone, and we were talking about how, yeah, it's hard when you're applying for a job and you're already conscious that of your skin color, and you're also conscious of how they're perceiving your disability. And for me, I think when I'm talking to people of color, that's one of the biggest kind of things that we both resonate on, no matter our individual like circumstances.
Thank you, Michael. You and I have spoken about the Tourette Association's kind of really desire to work more with communities of color and really expand our education and awareness in different communities. Randy asks, what recommendations do you have for the TAA to better reach distinct cultural communities? How would we be able to find and reach out to your family specifically sooner?
Yeah. Great. I mean, so I think what's great about what would help there is sharing more stories online. So I know years ago when my family was looking, they were kind of looking at this website. I think if there was like a link of maybe like blog posts, I think what's important is it's personal. To make these posts like personal, to make these info sessions personal, or even just things, videos that we can view at any time. I think so, for example, when my family would Google, they could see, oh, here's an article written by someone of color. And if you hit all these different avenues, then you can potentially help them earlier when they're looking for it. I think, doing outreach in schools as well, because my family for a while wasn't even aware of it. So I think it can definitely help on the educational level as well at schools. Some people might say, whoa, this is me, and I had no idea. And I think that's another way to reach out to families who haven't been diagnosed yet.
Absolutely. Another question we have is, what resources do you think are especially important for individuals with Tourette that are members of other minority groups, racial, sexual, etc.?
Yep. So I think what's helped me a lot, so I'm in college, but what's helped me a lot is affinity groups and cultural groups. I'm part of the Filipino organization at Northeastern University, and I'm part of other like affinity groups as well. And I've found that being in part of all these groups really helps. I think the sense of community and the sense of solidarity and being able to be around people with whichever identity or all identities that you're struggling with helps. I think it helps to just talk, and it helps to just listen and say, hey, I'm not the only one that's going through that. So definitely support groups if you're in school, or starting your own support group in your area, finding friends and turning that into like a regular thing would be really helpful.
Wonderful. Another question we have, it's more specific to the person, but they say, I have coprolalia, and in my church, swearing is extremely frowned upon. And I was even told that if I believe or try hard enough, it'll stop. Because of this, I ended up forcing those tics to be sub-vocalized, which is causing me a lot of distress. What advice, or what do you think I should do?
Yeah, so I just firstly want to say, I've been in that same boat. I've been in your same position. I also have, not as much now, but I do also have coprolalia, and I still feel those tics coming up, but I hold them a lot, and it's hard. I don't really have, an easy answer to this. I think for me, I'm Catholic, and it's hard. I think for me, that's where I really leaned on my support system. I think before I used to think that, school and the religious organizations were my only support system, but I realized I can find support systems somewhere else, right? And I think I found also ways to, practice spirituality and faith in my own way, right? And realize that yes, there's this like framework that they lay down, but you don't necessarily need to abide by that strictly. You can create your own definition of what spirituality means to you.
Thank you so much. And just so everyone knows, we have time for one more question. And the last question I'm going to ask you, Michael, is how can I help someone who might be having a difficult time understanding Tourette?
Yeah, so I think, again, I've been repeating this a lot. Put yourselves in their shoes and listen and be patient, right? I have to remind myself to keep a level head and to not get frustrated. And I think understanding, I used at one of the jobs I used to work at when I was working with kids is, if they're really frustrated or they're really confused and they're up here, if you're down here and you're calm, they're going to come down, right? And I think for me, sometimes these things can get very emotional for both people involved. And I think remaining calm and, taking it and listening will actually encourage them to also do the same when you're talking. And I think anything you can do that can really start and make a bridge of honest dialogue and communication, that's when I think you'll start to see improvement between this person understanding it and you.
Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you to everyone. All these questions were great. And Michael, you gave such incredible answers. If you don't mind going to the next slide, Michael.
Yep.
Thank you. So thank you again, everyone. And thank you, Michael, for a wonderful presentation. This is all the time that we have for our conference session. Once the session is closed, you will receive a survey on the presentation. We would greatly appreciate if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You will also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view a recording of the session. Additionally, the session will be posted on the Tourette Association's YouTube channel for those who were unable to participate today. We encourage you to reach out to us about this virtual conference or for other ideas and suggestions you may have. This presentation was presented free of charge thanks to our generous donors. If you appreciated this session, we welcome you to support the organization. Visit us at tourette.org to learn more and donate. On behalf of the Tourette Association, thank you again for joining us and taking the time to view our presentation. And thank you again, Michael. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.